Pro and anti-bailout protests have been held in the Greek capital as the country awaits a Sunday referendum on the terms of a new bailout deal. Thousands of Greeks gathered in front of the parliament calling for a yes vote on Sunday. A yes vote would make Greece eligible for more bailout loans as proposed by the European Commission. Under a yes vote, Greece would accept the institution's course for a new bailout package. Thousands of others have also gathered in Athens' Syntagma Square to protest against further austerity measures. Protesters are calling on their fellow citizens to vote no in Sunday's referendum on the country's bailout terms. A no vote would reject new austerity measures that are demanded by creditors, that is the EU, the IMF and the ECB. Let's talk to Press TV's Konstantin Venizelos, our correspondent in Athens. And Konstantin, you're at the heart of a country which has defaulted on its debt. What now?
Good morning, Hassan. Well, we would rather not yet call it a default, and I will explain why. Because we would rather use the term that Greece has fallen into arrears with its IMF debt, simply because this evening, Hassan, all the global credit agencies are restraining themselves from calling it a default, because a default has to constitute a credit event. And a credit event is when a private or a state entity cannot repay its debt to its creditor in a timely fashion. Therefore, technically speaking, most media outlets are referring to this as a default, but we would like to say, and we have to say really objectively, that Greece has fallen into arrears on its IMF debt because the IMF itself has received an urgent request from the Greek government to not yet call it, officialize it as a default for a few more days. A request to which the IMF responded late this evening and said that this, okay, we will discuss this in due course later in the week, that is. So before we before we say that Greece has plunged into a default, let's stay in an intermediate level and then call it, which it is, that Greece has fallen into arrears on its debt until we get a further, more involved response from the IMF, which now, if the IMF now wants to proceed and call it an official default, this of course carries a certain sense of permanence. This decision will have to be officiated by the IMF Board of Executives. Christine Lagarde herself will have to draft this document and have it approved, and this will take at least, well beyond the referendum on Sunday. It will take at least 10 days for that document to be rubber stamped as a default. So technically speaking, at the moment, at this hour, as we speak with you, Greece has fallen into arrears on its IMF debt until further notice.
It literally mean for Europe?
Well, it depends which way developments will lead Greece after the referendum. Whenever the Sunday vote is taking place, as far as we understand, no other agreement has been reached with the country's lenders that could undermine the default. And we'll have to see simply if banks will open next week. Greece has begun to face a very severe liquidity problem at the moment, having had to impose capital controls. Some banks will open tomorrow only for a few hours so that pensioners can take out 120 euros from the pension just been paid out to them. So yes, there are restrictions in place for liquidity in Greece, and we'll have to see what happens after the referendum. But we are on the countdown and the free fall, rather, all the way to the referendum, and we'll have to see if banks open next week and what happens after the referendum, both on a political level. If we have a yes vote, then Tsipras says he will resign. So you can imagine this will further complicate things. If we have a no vote, then negotiations will continue, perhaps with the European officials having then to proceed with some debt restructuring from Greece, a haircut. In other words, we have to say that at the moment, we have to wait until Sunday, speculate no further, and call this not a default, but Greece has fallen into arrears with its debt until we get a further response from the IMF. They too are waiting for the referendum. They're all on standby to see what happens on the Sunday vote. And afterwards, we will see how this plays out.
And of course, presumably, you've spoken to people on the streets about the upcoming referendum. In which direction is the public opinion geared towards? Is it geared towards a yes vote or a no vote?
Well, having followed this evening's yes protest by the Europeanists, you will see all in our news package, which is on its way to you. That was a very large protest. The entire middle class was out there on the street protesting against the Syria government. There is also a lot of propaganda at the moment against Greece, with domestic media, with European newspapers, with TV stations, all precluding the worst scenarios for Greece, precluding financial chaos, disorder, a society and an economy which is free-falling beyond control. And of course, yes, a lot of Greeks are in fear of a potential of what will happen the next day after the referendum. At the moment, I would say objectively, completely objectively, I would say that it's 50-50 for a yes or a no vote. We really can't tell. Greeks, when they face fear and economic uncertainty, they become more conservative. And perhaps a conservative vote will be the outcome, or perhaps if the Syria bravado and the passionate, aggressive advice they give to Greeks to vote no, finds fertile ground beyond the required 40% minimum for this vote to be valid, then we might see a no vote. We really can't speculate one way or another. This could swing either way, Hassan, this coming Sunday.
Indeed. Press Constantine of Venezuela is giving us the latest from Athens. Thanks there, Constantine.